I expect that I'm going to have a lot to say. So with that being said, let's tab this baby up. Let's talk. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about the book called Evermore by Alison Noel. So Evermore is a book that I read towards the end of middle school, and it is very inspired by Twilight. I don't know if you remember, but in the mid to late 2000s, we went through this big supernatural romance phase, mostly inspired by the popularity of Twilight in 2005. During this time, we suffered through dozens and dozens of Twilight copycats, and this book just so happens to be the one that I remember most. So back in 2010, my cousin actually gave me a copy of this book because I was pretty into Twilight at the time, and it's very similar to Twilight, as we'll go into later. But this isn't actually my original copy. I gave that to a friend, and I actually found this at a thrift store for 10 cents. And I thought, you know, why not just revisit this? I mean, it's only 10 cents and hours and hours of my time, but I digress. I also remember reading maybe the next 2 novels in the series. There are 6 books in total, which is kind of ridiculous, and I kind of regret asking my mom to spend her hard-earned money on these novels. So originally for this video, I wanted to do kind of a reading style vlog, but that didn't pan out because I didn't want to have to stop and film and stop and film because there was so much that I wanted to say. And I felt like I could just write notes and that would be good enough. So that's what I did, and we're going to go through all of my notes today. I actually have 24 pages, so we have a lot to get through. Grab a drink, grab a snack. It's going to be a long one. And just as a disclaimer, I'm not saying anything bad about Alison Noel, the author. She's probably a really, really nice lady. I know that I have a lot of bad things to say about this novel, but it does have good bones, and I'm going to go into that towards the end of the video if you want to see that, but don't send any hate towards Alison Noel. She's probably a really nice lady, but this book, there was so much I needed to say, I had to make a video about it, so that's what we're going to do today. So I probably should give a short synopsis of what this book is actually about. It is a book in the Immortal series, and that kind of gives you clues as to what's going on, but I will go into it a little bit more. So basically we have our main character, Ever. She was in a car crash and her family died. She was in a near-death experience herself, but was revived by somebody, and we will later figure out who that is. And then we have our love interest, Damon. Damon is, spoiler alert, he is an immortal, which we can kind of already guess that because he's mysterious and the series title is The Immortals, so it's not hard to guess. So anyways, he's immortal and he has supernatural powers, all that, the whole shebang. Also, Ever has powers of her own. She can read minds, and she can read books with one touch. She can see auras. She can talk to dead people that have not crossed over to heaven or wherever they go. And if she touches somebody, then she can like see their whole life story. And I think that's the best synopsis that I can give without giving too much away. So let's get into the breakdown of all of these tabbed pages. And it's a lot. So let's get started. So we're 1 page in and I already have a tab. This one is particularly funny to me because this is how she reveals that she has psychic powers to the audience. Basically, her friend Haven comes up behind her, puts her hands on her eyes, and is like, guess who it is? So it goes into like this long description of what Heather is wearing, and then at the end I'm going to read you a quote that is at the end of the page. She says, "But I don't know any of this from spying or peeking or even being told. I know this because I'm psychic." It's a reveal. It's definitely a reveal. I'll drink to that. It's apple juice, don't worry. So skip forward a couple of pages and she's talking about her near-death experience and her car crash, all that. And she talks about there being a guy at her car crash. And my guess is that it's Damon. Just a educated guess. Not that I haven't read this already. On page 9, she's at school, and there's a new guy in school, and the book that they are reading in their English class is Wuthering Heights. Now, I don't know if you've read Twilight, but I so happen to have read it more than once, I will say. And Wuthering Heights is the book that Bella is reading, talking about, whatever. I don't think it's mentioned quite as much as it is in this book. And I don't know why she chose the same book that was in Twilight. I mean, you would think that she would want to separate herself from Twilight in some way. And she just keeps hinting at it, I feel like. And I don't know if it's intentional or if it's like subconscious. But there's so many classic novels that you could have picked that are romantic. Any Emily Bront novel, there's a lot. Romeo and Juliet even. Like, star-crossed lovers, you know? Wasn't Romeo and Juliet also in Twilight? So maybe not Romeo and Juliet, but anyways. A couple pages later, she finally meets Damon, the new kid. And she talks about how she can't read his mind, she can't see his aura, he's kind of just a blank slate. This only happens to dead people, like her sister Riley. Which, by the way, her sister Riley visits her a lot, and Riley is dead. She's like a spirit or something. And if this only happens to dead people, something tells me that Damon's immortal. Just a guess. Then Ever tells Haven out in the hall that despite Damon's good luck, she is not interested, she doesn't like him. And surprise, he is right behind her and heard everything. Just as a side note, I have no idea how to pronounce Damon's name. I keep wanting to say Damien, and in fact, in a lot of my notes, it is Damien. But it is Damon. There's no I. And his last name is August or Auguste or Auguste. I don't know. I will put it here for you, how it's spelled and everything. Moving on. So then on page 25, we learn about Damon's effects on Ever. If he touches her, she gets an electric shock. And also, when he talks to her, the voices from everybody else and all their thoughts just disappear. And the room goes silent. Another side note, I really don't like her friends. I think they're very self-absorbed. And I know that they're like troubled teens or whatever, but I don't know. I just don't care for them. Then on page 30, we learn another Damon skill. So Ever knocks a bottle off of her desk, and before she can even catch it, Damon's done caught it and put it on her desk. Quote, he moves so fast, he actually blurred. So he's super fast. Sounds like another supernatural heartthrob we know. And then Ever decides that she needs to stay away from Damon because, and I quote, and that's exactly why I need to stay away from Damon, because his ability to charge my skin with his touch and silence the world with his voice is a dangerous temptation I cannot indulge. It is constantly mentioned how hot Damon is. Like, we get it. He's hot. Calm down. By the way, Ever lives with her aunt now because her family died. So her and her aunt go to this really fancy restaurant. And they run into Damon and his red-headed friend. And she doesn't have an aura either. Very strange. So after this encounter, we get... One of the worst parts of Twilight was how Edward snuck into Bella's room, invaded her private space because he protects her. And we get that here as well. Yay us. So Ever wakes up because she hears something in her room, and she thinks it's Riley, her dead sister, because Riley visits her all the time. And when she turns around and looks, it is just this shadowy figure in the corner of the room. Spoiler alert, we do figure out it is Damon. And he only did it once, so it wasn't that bad. Yeah, it kind of is. Stop invading people's private spaces. Oh my gosh. I don't know how many times we have to say this. It's gotta stop. So now they're back at school. Damon is talking to Ever's friends. And he says that he used to be a model, which does not make sense to me. Because, like, the whole thing about being immortal or a vampire or anything like that is that you don't want to be noticed. Because if you are noticed, then people will notice that you've lived a long time. In art class, Ever learns that Damon is the perfect painter, and apparently he's good at everything. And I'm sure we'll eventually find out that he can play the piano just like Edward. He also keeps giving Ever hints disguised as jokes that he's lived a long time. And this leads me to believe that we're going to get a Google Bing scene soon where she's doing research. We'll see. So we're 60 pages in, and Damon does like the jerkiest thing ever. Out of nowhere, Damon starts hanging out with the mean girl, Stacia. And he's flirting with her, giving her white roses, and all this mess. Why would he do this? Like, if he likes Ever, why is he hanging out with Stacia? It is explained later, but also the explanation makes no sense. And I refuse to accept any excuse for this behavior. This is ridiculous. Like I've mentioned in previous videos, I am all for being honest and upfront with people, and I don't understand why we have to keep playing hard to get or seeing if people get jealous. Stop playing games. Stop. It's stupid. So now we're at Ever's Halloween party, and Ever is dressed as Marie Antoinette, and surprise, Damon shows up as Count Fersen, which is supposedly Marie Antoinette's lover. She also has no idea how he knew that she was going to be dressed as this, since she kept it a surprise from everyone, including like her best friend. By the way, her friend Haven also likes Damon, and she thinks that Ever and Damon set this up where they would be dressed as a couple. Couldn't Damon have predicted this with like his psychic powers or whatever? So Haven feels betrayed by Ever because of this. While they're at the Halloween party, Damon and Ever kind of sneak off and have their first kiss, and surprise, surprise, Haven walks in on it. Also, one of the most annoying things that I've noticed is that Damon is constantly touching Ever, and it is driving me crazy because he does it so often, and he knows his effects on Ever. So during this scene, we get this paragraph that just really reminds me of Twilight, and I wanted to kind of read it to you. And I quote, "But that's what's so great about Damon. He's like an off switch. He's the only one I can't read. He's the only one who can silence the sound of everyone else. And even though he makes me feel wonderful and warm, as close to normal as I'll ever be, I can't help but think there's nothing normal about it." Does it remind you of Twilight? It really does me. And then Ever is wondering about his really old accent, and talks about how it reminds her of Wuthering Heights. Again, this book has been mentioned like 3 times already. It's getting old. So she says, "And that's another thing. Sometimes he uses California surf speak as well as anyone else around here. And other times he sounds like he walks straight out of the pages of Wuthering Heights." So after the party's over, we learn that Ever thinks that her gifts, her psychic powers or whatever, are a punishment for causing the wreck. And we spend a lot of time in this book with her feeling guilty about this and her ruminating over it, and it never really gets to the point where it explains why she thinks this until the very, very end of the book. So I guess you'll have to wait, just like I did, to learn why she feels guilty and why she feels like these psychic powers are her punishment. So then we're back in school, and Ever is mad at Damon because Damon left the party with his redheaded friend, and her name is Drina. She'll come into play more later on in this book, but for now, just know that her and Damon have a past. And they're in their English class, and they're talking. Basically, Damon's like, "I'm sorry I haven't been around much, I had a visitor," and Ever is like, "Oh, you mean Drina?" She's very jealous and everything. Ever tries to stand up to Damon, but fails. The reason why she fails at standing up to him is because he has this power over her, or this effect on her, and I will read a quote. "But the moment our eyes meet, I am back under his spell, a helpless hunk of steel to his irresistible magnet." And I feel like Damon is kind of scum because he knows his effects on Ever, but he keeps like wielding his power over her. I'm not a big fan of Ever as a character either, but I will say I hate Damon more so. Then they skip school and go to Disney World, or Disneyland? Disneyland. And then Damon pulls more magic. He keeps bringing flowers out of nowhere. Like he gave a bunch of white roses to Stacia. He gives red tulips to Ever, and they just come out of nowhere. So he's like a magician. And then he pulls another one where the fireworks at Disney turn into red tulips. This magic will be explained later, but basically it's like manifestation or whatever. Basically, he uses his manifestation to look like a cliche magician. So they took separate cars to go to Disneyland, which, by the way, is not romantic at all. One of the most intimate things you can do is ride in a car with somebody, because you're stuck in this box with this person. You have to talk to them. You have to engage in conversation with them. So to me, car rides are very personal. And it would have made more sense if they would have rode together, but you couldn't have the scene if they were riding together. So Damon tells Ever that he's going to follow her home, make sure she gets home okay, because they're like on the interstate or whatever. Ever gets a call from Haven, and then she looks behind her and he's gone. And he does this disappearing act a lot. Like I said, he is just like a magician. And Haven is talking about her friend that went missing, and that's a side plot that I don't really care about. So Damon just strands her on the way home from Disneyland. And this makes Ever mad, obviously, like I would be mad too. And Damon is begging Ever to forgive him. He claims that he just lost her on the highway, which doesn't make any sense. Then when they get to school, so Ever is actually kind of running late for school. She goes up to the school gate and it is locked. So she heads to the office, and before she gets to the office, Damon's like, oh, the gate was not locked. Like, Damon, you just watched her try to open the gate. It was locked, but he says it was never locked. So they go back to the gate, and the gate is unlocked and opened. This is just another Damon magic thing, but it's also very gaslighty to me. It's like convincing her that her perception of events was not true, even though it was true. Like, it was locked. And he's like, no, it was never locked. Whatever. So on page 22, Damon's waiting at Ever's house for her to get home, and there's just this very funny quote I'm going to read to you. When I get home from school, Damon is waiting on the front steps, smiling in a way that clears the sky of clouds and erases all doubts. It was just funny to me. Damon has skipped school again, and he's just waiting at home for her. So then they have this evening together where they're just talking, watching TV, asking questions, all these sorts of things. So they go to the pool, and they're still talking, and Ever's asking him what he is bad at, because from what she's seen, he's perfect. Like, he's good at everything. There is one thing that he said that really felt like a Twilight reference. He says, well, I've never been much good at baseball. The baseball scene in Twilight's very iconic, and I felt like that was kind of a reference. I don't know. Could be, could not be. Maybe it was subconscious, but... Oh yeah, and earlier when I said that he probably plays piano like Edward, I guessed right. He does play piano. And other instruments as well. Of course. And then Ever keeps pressuring him. She's like, come on, you have to be bad at something. And then he says, I suck at love. Okay, dude. I'll give him that. He does suck at love. Ever feels very self-conscious in his presence because she feels so meager and weak in comparison to him, and he could have really just given her something. He could have lied. He's been lying to her this whole time, by the way. So he could have lied and just said, oh, I'm terrible at knitting. I don't know. Give her something. Poor girl. Then she confronts him about Stacia and how he was flirting with her and all these things. And basically he says that, oh, I never meant to hurt you. I'm sorry if you feel that I played with your feelings, and that's a direct quote. I told you I'm not good at these sorts of things. And then he deflects and distracts her by doing some more magic. So he reaches behind her ear and brings out a red tulip, and then that's the end of the conversation. No repercussions to him. No nothing. He just gets to continue doing magic. Another way that he distracts her is that he's touching her, and obviously he knows his effect on her. I keep saying this, but we'll go into this later, but he can read minds too, and he can read her mind. Spoiler alert, I know. So, he knows his effects on her, and I don't know why he keeps doing these things. So then Damon's not at school again, of course. So then we learn that Haven gets a tattoo of the Ouroboros, which is an alchemy symbol, and it is a symbol of life, eternal life, creation, immortality, which is very much foreshadowing. And her tattoo looks infected. I don't really care about Haven at all. Or Miles, for that matter, which I haven't mentioned him. Miles is her other best friend. Moving on. So, Damon has skipped school, as we know, and he is waiting at her house again, and he takes her away. And Damon drives fast, really fast. So he takes her to the racetrack, and they bet on the horses, and Ever wins $800. So it's the next day, and they're supposed to go to school, and Damon gets on his hands and knees and is begging Ever, please don't make him go to school. He don't want to go to school. What a baby. And I quote, Ever, please. He drops to his knees, palms pressed together, eyes wide and pleading. Please don't make me go in there. If you have any kindness at all, you won't make me do it. I press my lips and try not to laugh. Watching my gorgeous, elegant, sophisticated boyfriend begging on his knees is a sight that I never thought I'd see. So, Damon stalls Ever just long enough for the bell to ring and for them to be late. And then they skip again, like it's nothing. This is probably the third or fourth time that they've skipped school, and we're only halfway through the book. So now they go on another date. They've been to Disneyland, they've been to the racetracks, and now they're having breakfast and going to the beach. Oh, and they drive separate cars again. While they're on their date, Ever is swooning over him. She thinks to herself, there's just something about him, something more than just the strange magic tricks and disappearing acts. I mean, for one thing, this guy never eats. So now she's noticing that he doesn't eat. And as soon as she thinks this, he starts eating. Then they go to the beach. And Damon shows Ever this hidden cave that he has found. So in the cave, they're just hanging out and stuff, and they almost go all the way. Then Ever just passes out like she goes to sleep. And then when she wakes up, Damon is gone. So Damon has left Ever once again, disappeared, but also he has left her half naked in a cave where if somebody found her, it could be dangerous for her. Like, ridiculous. No excuse. Obviously, she's upset by this, like I would be too, and she's talking to Riley about it. So Haven shows up, and then Damon shows up at the same time, and Haven tells them that Evangeline, which was her other friend, is dead. And like I said, this is a subplot that I don't really care about. It kind of matters, kind of doesn't, but anyways. Then Damon notices that her tattoo is infected, and then Haven leaves, and Damon and Ever are left alone again. She is still mad at him. He claims that he was surfing, and that's why he left the cave. When he saw that Ever had left, he came to her house. But she tells him that she looked for him, because he left her a note saying he went out surfing. So she looked for him, and the only two people that were out there were two blonde surfers, and Damon is not blonde. He wasn't surfing, by the way. He was like rescuing Evangeline or whatever, or trying to rescue Evangeline. Spoiler alert, but it doesn't really matter. She forgives Damon because he convinces her that he was out there when he wasn't, and he stays the night. And then she wants to know why she can't go to his house because he's been to her house. So he makes excuses like, oh, my house is a mess, all this. And Ever is like, and what if I decide to follow you? What will you do then? I ask, my nervous laughter halting the second he turns back to me. Don't follow me, Ever. And the way he says it makes me wonder if he said don't follow me ever or don't follow me ever. But either way, it means the same thing. Thanks. We needed more Ever's name puns. After Damon's gone, Ever has some more realizations about Damon. And I quote, I sit at my desk determined to get through my homework, but not getting very far before my thoughts return to Damon and all of his weird, mysterious quirks that I can no longer ignore. Stuff like, how does he always seem to know just what I'm thinking when I can't even get the slightest read on him? And how in just 17 short years did he find time to live in all of those exotic places, mastering art, soccer, surfing, cooking, literature, world history, and just about every other subject I can think of? And what's up with the way he moves so fast he actually blurs And what about the rosebuds and tulips and magic pen? Not to mention how 1 minute he's talking like a normal guy, and the next he sounds like Heathcliff or Darcy or some other character from a Bronte Sisters book. Add to that the time he acted like he saw Riley, the fact that he has no aura, the fact that Drina has no aura, and the fact that I know he's hiding something about how he really knows her. And now he doesn't want me to know where he lives? Lots of questions. Ever convinces her dead sister Riley to break into Damon's house to see how he's living, where he's living, stuff like that. Riley finds that his house is basically empty. No furniture, no nothing. And then Riley discovers this locked room that she didn't even try to go into because it creeped her out so much. And then about 8 pages later, Ever decides to just break into his house herself. She also breaks into his secret room, the door that was locked that Riley didn't go into, and sees all of this like memorabilia of himself from centuries and centuries ago. A painting of him by Van Gogh, a signed book by Shakespeare, etc., etc. Then she walks in on him sucking the infection out of Haven's tattoo, which is really gross, by the way. But apparently it was like some sort of magical potion or poison, whatever. So Ever thinks that he is a vampire, tries to like beat him up, and so he knocks her out magically or psychically, and then brings her home and puts her in bed. He also erases her memory up until she fell asleep at the beach, and she definitely doesn't remember going to his house. So he gets to rewrite history and feed her a line of events that isn't even true. He somehow erased both Ever and Haven's memories. A few days after this, Haven is back at school, and Ever faints just as she's remembering some of the stuff that happened over the past weekend. And then her friends and Damon convince her to go home, skipping school for maybe the 4th or 5th time now. And he takes her to his house. I guess he had time to like clean up or whatever, I don't know, but anyway, so he lets her go to his house. And she's just chilling on his couch. And she finds a picture of herself on his coffee table, which alarms her because she realizes that that picture was taken before Damon even moved there, before they even met. So she gets weirded out by this, leaves, goes home, and the next day at school, she is ignoring Damon because she thinks that he is a stalker. And then we see more Damon magic. Basically, since she's ignoring him and he doesn't like that, he knocks everyone in class out, like psychically or whatever, just so he can talk to Ever. It is then revealed that he can read her mind. He claims he had never lied to her. Then he retracts that and says, "Oh, well, I never lied to you about anything important," which is also not true. He lied by omission and for real lied about who he was, where he came from, everything. So Ever is scared of him, and as she's running outside, she remembers everything from that past weekend. And when she gets outside, he is already there because he's fast or whatever. Then there's this really weird couple of lines on page 201. Basically, she's talking about how she went into a strange room, saw all of the stuff with Marie Antoinette, Picasso, Van Gogh, all those. So I'm going to quote this because, I don't know, it's weird to me. He shakes his head and looks at me and says, "Well, for that matter, I was also good friends of Leonardo da Vinci, Botticelli, Francis Bacon, Albert Einstein, and John Paul, George, and Ringo." He pauses, seeing the blank look on my face, and groaning when he says, "Geez, Ever, the Beatles." He shakes his head and laughs. "God, you make me feel old." So just for like context, okay? I read this book, I was probably 15. This character, Ever, is 16, so she's around my age. She would know about the Beatles. And Alison Noel was pretty young when she wrote this, like maybe 20s, 30s. She should know that people a little younger than her know about the Beatles, right? Everybody knows about the Beatles, even if they don't like listen to their music or whatever. People know of them. I don't know, it just struck me as odd. Maybe I could understand stuff like that happened centuries ago, you not knowing about. Like, maybe Botticelli, if you didn't go to traditional school, you may not know about him. I can understand that. But the Beatles are in pop culture, and they've been in pop culture for a very long time. So I don't understand how Ever wouldn't know about the Beatles. So then he condescendingly tells her that he's an immortal. He's not a vampire. Ever, how could you be so stupid? Of course he's not a vampire. Those are mythical creatures. Damon is an immortal. That's literally how he comes across to me. Just super a-hole behavior. Like, of course she doesn't know. Like, immortality is just as mythical as vampires and werewolves and all that. I also think maybe that was kind of a dig at Twilight, too. Like, you have to be crazy to think that vampire story is realistic. This immortal story, yeah, that's where it's at. This is realistic, you know? Maybe that's just how I see it. One thing that kind of stuck out to me, when I think about this book, I think of immortal juice. It's not really explained very well. I haven't even mentioned it until now, but he always brings around a bottle with red juice in it, and for a second there, I ever thought it was like blood or something, but it turns out it's some sort of juice that keeps him healthy or something. Like, he doesn't have to eat. So I don't understand the immortal juice at all. I think it is explained in maybe the second or third book, but I'm not reading those. You cannot make me. I'm not reading those. I'm not that curious. And then he tells her that he is the one that brought her back to life after the crash, which everyone could have predicted that. And then here's another thing I've always remembered about this book. Ever tells Damon to leave her alone and never see her again. So she's like got her face covered or whatever. When she opens her eyes, the whole parking lot is filled with red tulip. So Ever continues about her normal life without Damon. And Ever and her two friends, Haven and Miles, go to some sort of festival. And it is there where she learns that alcohol dulls her psychic abilities. Haven has brought a little flask of alcohol with her to this festival and spiked their drinks. And that's how she learns that alcohol dulls her senses, her psychic senses. So they all go home, and Ever steals alcohol from her aunt and hides it in her room to basically keep the buzz going and her psychic abilities dulled. She briefly, for a short period of time, becomes an alcoholic. Then she starts wearing cute clothes again because she no longer has to hide behind her hoodie. She sneaks a water bottle full of vodka into school, puts it in her locker so that she can stay buzzed. And when her powers start to come back, she goes back to her locker and starts chugging it. So while she's chugging this alcohol, Stacia, the classic mean girl, catches her on camera. She then blackmails her for money because Ever ruined one of her dresses. And then both of them go to the bathroom and just start drinking together. Stacia said she wouldn't tell on her if she gave her money for that dress, but she still told on her, and then Ever got suspended. But she's happy now because she can stay home and she can spend her days drinking and building up a tolerance. Her aunt hides all the alcohol in the house except she forgot about the hidden alcohol left over from the Halloween party. And Ever takes this up to her room and hides it. Ever uses this to drink her suspension away and avoid her psychic powers. December 21st, which is the winter solstice, rolls around, and I haven't mentioned this, but Ever saw in Haven's mind the date December 21st, and she assumes that that's the date that Drina has invited her to a party. Also, Ever has been having dreams about her running through a canyon and then seeing a light. She's been having these dreams for a long time now. The last day she was at school, her art teacher gave her a painting that Damien wanted her to have, and Ever just left it face down in her car. She didn't even want to see it. But she wakes up on December 21st and sees his painting in the corner of her room. And instead of the painting that she thought it was actually a painting of her running through a canyon, which was her dream. So this compels her to just run out of the house and go find this canyon. She's in her nightgown, she grabs her flip-flops and her keys and just goes. She makes it to a national park, and then Miles calls her, inviting her to the party that Drina invited Haven to, which was in a canyon too. And she tells him that she's actually nearby because she sees a light down in the canyon and assumes it's that party. And then she tells him it's really foggy, and he's like, wait, there's no fog. And before he can finish, the phone is yanked out of her hand, and Drina smiles and says, hello, Ever, I told you we'd meet again. Drina arrives, and this is supposed to be the climax of the book, but as you'll see later, this book breaks a lot of storytelling guidelines in very dumb ways. So then Drina starts bragging and explaining in vivid detail how she lured her there, who, what, when, where, why, just very verbose and drawn out. It's this villain trope that I find particularly irritating. They trap their victims and then explain in vivid detail how all of this came to be, what their plan was, what they're going to do with them, why they wanted to do it. This is annoying, for one, but two, if this victim gets away, they now know your whole thought process. They know your motives, they know your reasons, they know your whole plan and the thought process behind it, making them more able to beat them in the future. So, shut your mouth, villains. And she continues and for a couple of pages explaining herself, and then Ever interrupts her and is like, what do you want? Well, Drina says, don't rush me. She narrows her amazing green eyes on mine. All in good time. Now where was I before you so rudely interrupted? Ah, yes, we were talking about you, how you ended up here, how it's not turning out anything like you expected. And truth be told, it never has, was, or I suspect will be. You see, Damon and I go way back. I'm talking way, well, you get the picture. And yet, despite all those years together, despite our longevity, you just keep showing up and getting in the way. And it is here that it is revealed that Ever is basically a soul that keeps getting reincarnated. She just keeps coming back into Damon's life and ruining it for Drina. So Drina's going to get rid of her again, like she's been doing for years. We learn that she's killed all of Ever's past lives, that she's been planting the dreams in her head. Drina describes all of the planning and manipulation that she did to her friends and family in order to get to where they are now. And instead of running again, Ever just sits there and accepts her fate. She's like, I'm gonna die, so she's gonna let her kill her. When Ever starts imagining the day before her family died and how happy they were in that car ride before it crashed, she starts healing and her clothes start mending and the power of love or whatever saves her. This scares Drina and catches her off guard because this has never happened before. And then Ever sees a glowing light and just walks towards that and ends up in a magical realm called Summerland. And this is where Damon is right now. In this place, everything that you can imagine will come true. So like if you think of something, it'll just pop up out of nowhere. She also finds out that Damon was the one that put the light there so that she could go towards it and end up in Summerland. This scene is so long, so bear with me. We'll get through it together, okay? So apparently both Drina and Damon were creating the weird dreams that she's been having. Drina created the dream and then Damon created an escape for the dream. While I was reading this, I was like, well, if you knew Drina was planning these dreams, if you knew all this stuff, why didn't you try to stop it or at least tell Ever what was going on? We could have avoided all this. But then he tells her he didn't know it was Drina, which I don't know how. I don't know why he didn't explain all this in the first place. Like, if he loves her, wants to be with her forever or whatever, why not just tell her the truth, tell her everything up front? I don't understand that. But anyways, if he would have told her just avoid canyons, she probably shouldn't go and be in a canyon, we could have avoided all of this. So now it's time for the big reveal. Ever and Damon are both immortal, as well as Drina. Damon made her immortal when he revived her at the car crash. So then Damon explains that he was watching the whole thing remotely, whatever that means. And he was just going to let her die unless she made it clear that she wanted to live. He didn't want to repeat the whole reviving selfishly or without consent that he did at the crash. And when she started regenerating, he knew that she wanted to live. And because only love heals, when she thought of the love of her family, it healed her. Damon tells her that she should probably go see Ava the psychic. That way she can shield her mind from his mind reading. This makes her mad because she hates Ava for reasons. I don't think I've mentioned this, but Ava was the psychic that came to their Halloween party, kind of sort of as a gimmick, but she's actually a real psychic. She can see Riley. Basically, I think that Ever is mad at Ava because she is trying to convince Riley to cross over so that she could be with her family, and Ever just doesn't want to let Riley go yet, so she's mad at Ava because she thinks Ava's brainwashing Riley. So then Damon tries to explain how they're immortal. He tries to explain manifestation and all of these sorts of things. It really just I'm not clicking with it. I don't know if it's my head or if it's just, it doesn't make sense in general, but I just can't get with it. It goes on to talk about quantum physics, and I'm like, is Damon even sure what quantum physics are? I don't even know what quantum physics are, but I know it's like a real thing. And immortality, manifestation, all that is not real, as far as I know. Like, I don't think there's a branch of quantum physics that talks about manifestation. I just don't think so. I'll quote him because maybe it'll make sense to you, but sure don't to me. So Ever is asking him about how he can conjure up like tulips and flowers just out of midair. And he says, manifesting is simple quantum physics. Consciousness brings matter into being where there was once merely energy. Not nearly as difficult as people choose to think. And then he explains that he's been around for a very long time, and so he's had time to, I don't know, play with all this stuff or whatever. So then he tells Ever that she has a choice if she wants to be immortal or not. All she has to do is let go, whatever that means, and not think about it, just like put it out of her mind. If it were that easy, like, wouldn't you be like just an immortal guy and be like forgetting you're immortal and then die? Like, how does that work? It just sounds too simple to me. Also, how did he make her immortal? Is it just because he brought her back to... How did he bring her back to life? So she tells Damon that Drina has been responsible for her deaths in all of her lives. And apparently Damon didn't know this. Like, I don't know how he didn't know this. They have psychic shields in this universe or whatever, and Damon and Drina have psychic shields so they can't read each other's minds. But I feel like there should be a way around that, you know? Like, just to make sure she's not, like, murdering anybody. I don't know. They've lived for a long time, so I don't know how he hasn't caught her in the act before. Then Damon realizes why they've never consummated their relationship before. It's because Drina kills her before that can happen. And this is something that comes to play in the later novels. As I was reading this, some of that stuff was coming back to me, and I remembered that one of them, at that time I couldn't remember who it was, but it was actually Damon, who got an illness, or he was poisoned, or has a disease where if he is touched by Ever, he will die. But anyways, that's just something that comes into play in the later novels, just so you know. So Damon talks about his history, how he came upon immortality, yada yada yada. And he uses a bunch of science jargon to explain how this is possible. By the way, and I've said this before, but he's very condescending towards Ever, and I cannot stand that. He keeps saying stuff like, this isn't fantasy, Ever, this is real life. And I'm like, no, it's not. Like, if somebody told me they were immortal, I'd be like, oh my gosh, what else exists, you know? If somebody who's immortal exists, couldn't vampires and werewolves and all that exist? It seems just as fantastical to me. And I'm going to give you an example of how condescending he is. So Ever asks him, so you can still age? He laughs. Yes, I got to a certain point and then I just stopped. I know you prefer the frozen in vampire theory, but this is real life, Ever, not fantasy. So after this extensive history lesson, then Damon goes into every mysterious incident that Ever questioned him about. Why he was sucking on Haven's wrist. Why did he leave her at the beach half naked, alone? Every time he was seen with Drina, even though they weren't together. Just a laundry list of explanations. And now you know everything. Though I think it's obvious why I couldn't be quite so forthcoming at the time. Damon continues to be condescending towards Ever and how she thought that he was a vampire. Like, he keeps bringing it up. So then she questions why he sneaks into her room at night, which is a story element that should have stopped at Twilight and really shouldn't have been in there either. He explains that he was there to observe. He goes on saying how he feels responsible for her, and it was only once, so it must have been Drina the other times. There's also a lot of hand squeezing in this chapter, so Ever ends up forgiving him for all of his everything, and she loves him again. He tells her that if they want to be together, then she has to accept what they are. And that if she decides to be with him, then all she has to do is call out for him and he'll be there. And after they kiss, she is transported back home in her room. In my opinion, I think this book should have ended here or right after she discovered that they are immortal. This would have been a pretty good cliffhanger, because we all know that there were going to be other books. You don't just make one of these. And in this case, there are 5 other books. And there's also spin-offs and prequels, but no, it does not stop here. We still have about 35 pages left. Miss Noel just does not know how to quit. On page 265, she's back home. She's talking on the phone to Miles. And there's some period shaming in here from her friend Miles. And if you know me, you know I can't stand that sort of thing. We always talk about it as ways to shame women, but we never talk about it in ways that would be helpful, like, you know, irregularities and stuff like that. I think it's important to talk about even with the male population. I don't think they should be grossed out by it. It's just something that happens. It should be talked about no matter what your gender is, because it happens to half the population. It's just so immature. Moving on. So then Riley shows up and she mentions to Ever that maybe she should go see Ava. Eva refuses because she hates Ava. Then Riley becomes translucent and just disappears, saying that she doesn't have much time left. So Ever visits Ava after all. She blames her for Riley's absence and saying that she's brainwashed her. Ava tells her that Riley can't see her parents or her dog because she's stuck over here with Ever. She just kind of wanders around when she's not with Ever. Ava tells her that she just didn't cross over completely because she ran back to find Ever. So Ava tells her that Ever has to give Riley her blessing to leave, to cross over. And after many outbursts from Ever, they finally get to helping Ever create a psychic shield for herself. She doesn't want to learn how to undo it so that she can just stay normal forever, even though Ava thinks it's a good idea to just know how, just in case. But she refuses and just wants to be normal. So Riley's back and she says she's done with Ava. She just wants to hang out with Ever. Ever goes back to school, and we hear about how all the side characters are doing. Their love lives, their school lives, their home lives, and on and on and on. Not that we really care. And it's Valentine's Day, so she receives a little lollipop with a note that came from Damon. Then she confronts Riley and asks her why she hasn't crossed over. She tries to give her her blessing to cross over, and we finally learn why Ever feels so guilty for the car accident. After 284 pages of her just feeling sorry for herself and feeling guilty, we finally learned what happened. So Ever thinks that because they turned around to get her sweatshirt that she's responsible for the wreck, because if they hadn't have done that, they wouldn't have been at that place at that time when the deer ran out into the road. Ever refuses to believe it's anybody's fault but her own. Even after Riley tries to tell her that there were many other factors involved, she still thinks it's her fault. And then Riley tells her that her mom and dad would not want her to feel guilty. And then Riley crosses over. So we finally get our Google/Bing scene where she's looking up the meaning of the flowers that Damon would give her and the flower that he would give to Stacia. So tulips mean undying love, and white rosebuds mean the heart that knows no love, or heart ignorant of love. So I'm going to read this because it's so ridiculous that I feel like I couldn't do it justice. So after she finds out that the flowers have meaning and stuff like that, and it reads, "And I know he was testing me the whole entire time, holding this huge, life-changing secret with absolutely no idea how to tell me, not knowing if I'd accept it, reject it, or turn away, flirting with Stacia just to get a reaction so that he could eavesdrop on my thoughts and see if I cared. And I'd become so adept at lying to myself, denying my feelings about practically everything, I ended up confusing us both. And while I certainly don't condone what he did, I had to admit that it worked. So I hated that a lot. Why was the fact that he was playing with her head just kind of brushed off? She does say she doesn't condone what he did, but she kind of does, you know? She's kind of like applauding him for thinking of such a thing. No? Like, that's so ridiculous. Oh my gosh. Ever tries to call out to Damon, but fails. She then goes downstairs and finds Drina in her kitchen. Now we get another confrontation we shouldn't have to suffer through. We only got 10 pages left, so we gotta wrap this up. So we get more monologue from Drina. Lucky us. She rolls her eyes and stands. You mortals, so dull, so stupid, so predictable, so ordinary. And yet, despite all your obvious defects, you always seem to inspire Damon to feed the hungry, serve mankind, fight poverty, save the well, stop littering, recycle, meditate for peace, just say no to drugs, alcohol, big spending, and just about everything else that's worthwhile. One horribly boring altruistic pursuit after another. And for what? Do you ever learn? Hello, global warming. Apparently not. And yet, somehow Damon and I always seem to get through it, though it can take far too long to deprogram him, return him to the lusty, hedonistic, greedy, indulgent Damon I know and love. Though, believe me, this is just another little detour, and before you know it, we'll be back on top of the world again. That was one of the most cliche monologues I've ever heard in my life. You mortals. You couldn't think of anything else to say? You mortals. So then we learn that Drina is the one that caused the car accident. She's the one that spooked the deer into running out into the road. All this effort from Drina over a man that, to be honest, really sucks. So then Drina attacks Ever and they're fighting and whatnot. Ever envisions her happy moment again with her family, full of love, and she then gains her strength back again. Heals and throws Drina across the room. Drina is very shocked again. This results in a lot of property damage that Ever's going to have to explain to her aunt. So Drina has a new power that we discover, and that is that she can cause pain with her mind or something, because she's just like staring at Ever and Ever's like writhing in pain. And just when you think it's about over, Ever meekly, like barely grazes her chest, punches her in the chest. And then Damon shows up. Then Drina backs into a wall, shrivels up, and dies. Apparently, whenever Ever punched her in the chest, it hit her heart, which is like a weak spot for her because she didn't have love in her heart or something. Let's see what Damon has to say about it. How? I turn to Damon, searching for answers, but he just smiles and says, "It's over, absolutely, completely, eternally over." He pulls me into his arms, covering my face in a trail of warm, wonderful kisses, promising, "She'll never bother us again." Did I kill her? I asked, not quite sure how I feel about that. Despite what she did to my family and all the time she claimed to have killed me, he nods. But how? I mean, if she's immortal, then wasn't I supposed to cut her head off? He shakes his head and laughs. "What kind of books are you reading?" Then his face becomes very serious when he says, "It doesn't work like that. There's no beheading, no wooden stakes, no silver bullets. It all comes down to the simple fact that revenge weakens and love strengthens. Somehow you managed to hit Drina right in her most vulnerable spot. The fourth chakra was your target, and you hit the bullseye." So Ever says, "Huh?" The body has 7 chakras. The fourth chakra, or heart chakra as it's sometimes called, is the center of unconditional love, compassion, the higher self, all of the things that Drina was lacking, and that left her defenseless, weakened. Ever, her lack of love is what killed her. How many different things can you fit into one novel? We have quantum physics, manifestation, meditations, immortality, psychic powers, dead people, other realms, and now chakras? And probably more. Like, it's just a lot. And then Ever worries that he just wants in her pants, that he's been chasing her all these years because he never got to sleep with her. And then she's like, "Does this mean I have to remain a virgin for eternity? Disappear every few years just to keep his interest?" And then Damon's like, "No, I would never do that." Then I'm like, well, what led you to go against Drina? Did you get bored of Drina and just went to Ever? Like, how did that go about? Because he, I'm guessing, loved Drina at one point. And I didn't mention this earlier, but Drina and Damon used to be married like 500, 600 years ago. They're like 600 years old. So apparently he did love her at one point. What made him not love her? Because if I were Ever, I would be thinking of that too. I'd be like, well, you left Drina for me, so you could leave me for someone new, you know? So then it goes on. We're on the last few pages here. He's telling her why he didn't come when she called for him earlier. Ever says, "I thought you would have come sooner. I mean, it would have been nice to have had some help." Then Damon says, "I heard you and I would have come sooner, but I needed to know you were truly ready and not just lonely after saying goodbye to Riley. So you almost let me die in there because you wanted to be sure?" He shakes his head. "I would never have let you die. Not this time." "Well, then why didn't you come?" Like, He smiles. In time I'll teach you everything, I promise. But Ever, you need to know what all of this really means. You'll never be able to be with your family again. You'll never cross that bridge. You need to know what you're getting yourself into. He holds my chin and looks into my eyes. But I can always just sort of drop out, right? You know, give up like you said. He shakes his head. It becomes much harder once you're ingrained. I look at him knowing it's a lot to give up, but figuring there's got to be some way around it. Riley promised me a sign and I'll take it from there. But in the meantime, if eternity starts today, then that's the way I'm going to live it. Knowing that Damien will always be by my side. I mean always, right? He looks at me, waiting. I love you, I whisper. And I love you, he smiles, his lips seeking mine. Always have, always will. And that's how it ends. So Ever is willing to risk never seeing her family again just to be with Damien. It kind of reminds me of If I Stay. And I've only seen pieces of that movie, but it reminds me of that a little bit. So we finally made it. We've made it through this thing together. So we definitely have a lot to talk about. We are only on page 14 of my 24-page notes. So yeah, let's get started on that. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that Damien can read Ever's mind, but Ever cannot read Damon's mind. There's definitely a power imbalance here. The fact that Damon can read Ever's mind, but Ever can't read Damon's, definitely puts them on an unlevel playing field, especially when dating. Like, I would not want anybody I was dating to be able to read my mind. I want to control what I give people. You know what I mean? So this aspect of the book is just very weird to me. It's especially weird when Ever can read everybody else's mind but cannot read his, and it reminds me of Twilight because in Twilight Edward can read everybody's mind except for Bella's. I understand that she explains it later that they can put a shield on their mind, but we could have just got rid of that aspect altogether and it would have made the story more even. And I understand for plot reasons why she couldn't read his mind, because then she would just know everything already. There would be no mystery or anything like that. However, to have him read her mind is just really creepy to me. Also, Damon spends most of the book lying to her, manipulating, playing games, brainwashing her, and him being able to read her mind makes all of this so much easier. So, going back to Twilight, sorry to keep bringing that up, but it's the only thing I can really compare it to. So I just had to change cameras because I ran out of memory in that one. Yay! I've been talking for too long. Anyways, so where was I? Oh, so in Twilight she does the same thing. Edward can read minds, which is something that makes sense in the story. Because a lot of vampires in this world have different supernatural powers depending on a few different factors, one of those being the person that you were before you turned into a vampire. Say what you want about Twilight, but I do think that she does lore and world building pretty well. Like, I know there are a lot of like relationship issues within that series, and it definitely has its faults, but I feel like one of its strong suits is lore, world building, which makes it really interesting and like fantastical. Anyways, so Edward cannot read Bella's mind. This is important for one, it differentiates her from everyone else, and two, it levels the playing field. Bella has more power because she has privacy, and she's able to hold things back from Edward if she wants to. In this book, however, it takes that concept and screws it up entirely. There is no reason that they could not be on equal grounds. In this situation, Damon holds a lot of power, and while he does try to give some power back to Ever, he does it at all of the wrong times. Like when Ever is about to die. Twice. In those situations, he's like, well, I don't want to save you if you don't really want to be saved. Also, it makes no sense that he can read minds. He's just immortal. Like, he can live forever. He's not some supernatural creature. He's just a human that found out how to live forever. If they removed the whole mind reading thing, it would have saved me a lot of frustration. So now we're going to talk about every time Twilight was either referenced, copied, or mentioned. So the first time that I noticed this was when they talked about Wuthering Heights. And Wuthering Heights is a book that is actually in the first Twilight book. It is mentioned in this book about 3 times. And I don't know if it was a subconscious thing, but they really could have picked any other book. Because they don't talk about what's in Wuthering Heights or anything like that. They just talk about the name and how she's read it, and then they also talk about how Damon kind of sounds like a Wuthering Heights character. That's all that they ever talk about when it comes to Wuthering Heights, so they could have used any other book name. So 2 is Damon's effects on Ever. The language that is used around their relationship is very Twilight-esque, like how gorgeous Damon is, how he makes her feel, etc., etc. Number 3 is Damon being really old. And although Edward is only 100 years old, Damon is apparently 600 years old. Honestly, at that point, just kill me. Number 4, and this one drives me crazy, but it's Damon sneaking into Ever's room because he felt protective. So he invaded her private space, not only in her mind, but also her physical room. That's so gross. It's something that should have just stopped with Twilight. It didn't need to happen again. Number 5 is Damon saves Haven by sucking on her wrist to get the poison out. Kind of like how Edward does that in the end of Twilight, where he's preventing her from becoming a vampire by getting the venom out. Number 6, Ever can read minds, but she cannot read Damon's. Kind of like how Edward can read minds, but he cannot read Bella's. Number 7, Damon is super fast, like Edward. He also drives fast. Number 8, Damon tries to stay away from Ever multiple times. Number 9, everyone is attracted to Damon, just like in Twilight, where everyone is attracted to Edward. Number 10, Damon is very talented. In fact, overly talented. I remember Edward being talented too, but for the most part it was just piano, I think. But Damon can play piano too. He can do anything and everything. Number 11 is that both Twilight and Evermore don't really have structured plots. It's kind of a running joke that there's not really much going on in Twilight until like the last few chapters, which is true, but it's also true for this book as well. These 2 books are just about 2 people getting to know each other, and one of them just so happens to be a supernatural being. Number 12 is the fact that both main characters in Evermore and Twilight go crazy when their lover abandons them. So in this book, Ever becomes an alcoholic, and in the Twilight series, I think it was New Moon, it's in another book, not the first book, she becomes an adrenaline junkie. So both characters kind of go wild when their lover leaves them. In number 13, Damon says that he's no good at baseball, which I do believe was a direct reference to Twilight because we all know the famous baseball scene. There are probably a lot of other examples of this, but those are the main ones that I noticed. So now let's talk about every time Damon was an a-hole or a douchebag or a jerk, whatever you want to call it. A terrible person. Number 1 is how Damon constantly touches Ever, which I think is a manipulation tactic because he can read her mind, so he knows how much of an effect he has on her. Number 2 is gaslighting with his magic. The best example that I can use to describe what I'm talking about here is when the school gate was closed and he watched Ever try to open this gate. It was locked. And then they head to the office, and on their way there, Damon's like, it wasn't locked and it wasn't closed. And then they go back and it's just open. He had opened it with his magic and then tried to convince her that it was just never locked to begin with. And that was really frustrating. Number 3 is when Ever asked Damon if he is bad at something, and he could literally not give any examples of what he's bad at. Even if he had to make it up. Even if he had to lie to her, he's already been lying to her, so I don't know why this would be any different. But he just doesn't want to give her anything except those sucky answers like, oh, I'm not that great at baseball, or I suck at love, which are dumb answers. He could have just lied to spare her feelings, but he couldn't even do that. Number 4 is that Damon is constantly skipping school and convincing Ever to skip school with him. He knows this would not be good for her if she chose not to be immortal and wanted to go to college. He knows that this would be on her record, but Damon is too selfish to care. Number 5 is one of the absolute worst ones. Damon flirting with Stacia so that he could get inside Ever's mind and see if she liked him. The reasons really don't matter. This was just so incredibly manipulative, deceitful, and dishonest. If anyone does this to you, run. Run fast and don't look back. Also, the first time she asked him about this behavior, he kind of just deflects and distracts her. And when she finally figures out why he did it, the reason is just so stupid. And he expects her to know the difference between the meanings of a tulip and a white rosebud. And then to top it all off, she blames herself because she was good at lying to herself, and so she confused them both. Number 6 is that Damon leaves Ever half naked in a cave on the beach by herself after trying to sleep with her the night before, leaving her to think that his absence is because she didn't put out. Oh, and then he tries to convince her that he was actually there just surfing, which is another example of his gaslighting behavior, but anyways. And number 7 is when Ever walks in on him sucking the poison or infection out of Haven's wrist, and he knocks her out psychically, erases her memory, leaving her confused afterwards, and then he tries to rewrite history. And just as a side note, he's going to have to explain everything to her anyways because he did make her immortal. So he's going to have to come clean to her anyways. Why not sooner rather than later? I don't understand why he's holding off. He's known her for like hundreds of lifetimes. I just don't understand his thought process behind wanting to keep it all a secret when she's got to know anyway. It'd save us a lot of trouble if you just be honest, Damon. Number 8. When Ever is ignoring him at school, he goes to the extremes, knocks everybody in the school out just so he can talk to her. And you can tell he feels proud of it too. Number 9. It's probably the second most infuriating part of this book. And it's the fact that Damon is constantly being condescending towards Ever. And he's constantly bringing up how Ever used to think he was a vampire in the beginning. Like, an immortal is just as unbelievable, dude. Number 10. He almost lets Ever die twice. Because he wasn't sure if she was really wanting to live. There are probably tons and tons of examples of him being a total douchebag. But I'm going to stop it right here and we're going to move on to the next segment. So now let's talk about inconsistencies, dumb things, and a few questions I have. So right after Damon knocks out the entire school just to talk to Ever, Ever stands up and then a few lines later, she springs from her seat. And you can't do both. So did she sit down in between those few lines or what? Another thing that I noticed that was kind of dumb was... And I'm going to preface this by saying that I don't say, oh my god, unless I'm saying that I don't say, oh my god. I just feel like it's kind of disrespectful. Me personally, if other people say it, that's their own thing or whatever they want to do. But for me personally, it just feels kind of disrespectful. And so I don't say that as an exclamation or anything like that. I'll say, oh my gosh, or oh my god, you know, but I never say with the hard D. I don't know. I've just always done that. I think it came from my mom probably. But anyways, just as a preface, I don't normally say that. But in this instance, they do something really, really dumb. So they spell oh my god as O-M-I-G-O-D. But it's all one word. And I'm going to put it on the screen right here. It is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Like, just so dumb. I hate it so much. It's kind of one of the things that stuck with me. When I think about this book, I think of that. Oh my god, spelt like that. And yeah, it's just so stupid. Another thing that I thought was really dumb was they were constantly making puns out of Ever's name. Which, yes, we know Ever is not a very common name. You don't have to tell us. And you don't have to make fun of it either, you know. There's this whole thing I've been kind of curious about delving into a little bit more, which is the main character names in books. Sometimes people will go the classic route and they'll just choose normal names. But a lot of times in young adult fiction, it will be the most, like, weirdest names. Or, like, not weird, but, like, unique. So they're trying to make their main characters really stand out. And what they're doing is kind of following the same sort of tropes that other young adult authors are doing, which is naming their characters with very unique names. And it's kind of a phenomenon I've been really interested about. One thing that kind of struck me as weird in this instance, not only is her name weird, but her sister's name is totally normal. So we have Ever and we have Riley. Yeah. A lot of the times when parents pick their children's names, they will kind of follow the same trend for all of their children. And to the extreme, some people will do this where, like, the Kardashians, all of their names start with a K. And that's a very extreme. But most people they like a certain type of name, and so they tend to gravitate towards those names. So people who like very classic names like Jessica, Gracie, Zoe, the very more classic names, they'll gravitate towards them, and then all of their children will have very similar styled names. But in this book, it's kind of weird because we have Ever and Riley. It just struck me as weird. Another thing that I thought was really dumb was Drina's monologues. They were just so drawn out, so cliched, so villainous. It was just dumb. So another thing I thought was kind of dumb was that Ever can see auras, but it's not really mentioned a whole lot. Like, I don't really see that a lot in this book. It's mentioned a couple of times, and a lot of the times she'll be like, there's colors everywhere and stuff like that. For the most part, she doesn't even notice aura. She reads minds a lot. And that is mentioned way more than her other supernatural abilities, like reading a book by touch, which was only mentioned once. Another thing that I thought was really stupid was the repetition in this book. It was very repetitive. And this isn't always a bad thing. Like, you could use repetition for good. You can use it to hammer down a point, It can be a tool. But one thing that just, in terms of writing style, that really annoyed me was her repetition. So I will list the things that are reoccurring. People shrugging. People just shrugged all the time. Like, they would just be shrugging all the time. Hand squeezing was kind of repetitive, especially in that one chapter. It was just over the top. Tulips. I saw a lot of tulips in this book. And I love tulips, but it's kind of overdone, okay? Stop it with the tulips. Damien being a jerk happened a lot. People swooning over Damon, sorry. People swooning over Damon. Ever being an idiot. Ever's friends being really dull and self-absorbed. Ever's aunt being oblivious. Drina being the predictable villain. But last and certainly not least is every time Press My Lips was written in this book. Or any iteration of Press My Lips. Press her lips. Press their lips. Press and lips were just really overdone in this novel. If you took a shot every time Press and Lips were written in this novel, you'd be drunk faster than ever in chapter 28. I counted the times that this book said Press Lips, and it was approximately 34 times, which is way too much for one book. And there was a couple of questions I had, which I will kind of include in the category of dumb things. One of them was, how did he make her immortal? If she can just opt out, how does she even join? And also, why do immortals have powers? Like, they're just humans that decided to live forever. Doesn't make any sense to me. So that was the end of inconsistencies, dumb things, and questions that I had. So now we're going to go on to the theme. And the theme is power equals love. But what does love even mean? Didn't Damien love Drina to begin with? What does love mean in this novel? Is it just positive thoughts? This whole book revolves around manifestations, positive thinking. So what does love even mean in context of this novel? Why did Damien love Ever even though she was a different person every time he met her? Maybe some personality traits were the same, but in the end she doesn't remember who he was because she don't remember her previous lives. So it's not reciprocated love, especially in the beginning because she knows nothing. So do they love each other because they're supposed to out of some destiny or fate? Are they willing participants or just victims of fate? Also, how does he find her every single time she reincarnates? So let's move on and talk about the other books in the series. So there are 6 books in this series, not including the spin-offs and the prequel. And 6 is a lot. It's probably too much. So from my memory and some brief research I did, the other books mostly consist of Ever and Damon trying to have sex. Of course there are other things involved, but the main plot for the last 5 books is the fact that Damon cannot be touched by Ever or he will die. Like he's been poisoned or something. So they have to find the antidote so they can finally have sex. And that takes up 5 more books. And it's at the end of the last book when it finally happens. And that's it. The rest of the series leads to a single night in the hotel at the end of book 6. I think that's all you need to know about the rest of the books. Alright, so now let's talk about the good things in this book. Because while I did bash this book a lot, there are some things that have potential to be good. So this book has a lot of good ideas and it has some good bones. Like there's some potential here to be a pretty good story if it weren't for the cliches, the unlikable characters, and the multiple Twilight references. I like the immortality aspect. It's different from a lot of YA supernatural love stories in that it's not, you know, the classic vampire, werewolf. Is that it? There are others. But, you know, it's not the classic supernatural twist. It's just a human who found out how to be immortal, how to live forever. But yeah, it's not the classic love interest. It's a little bit different and I can appreciate that. So the fact that they can go to different realms is also very interesting. I felt like that could have led to some really cool story elements. The cover is pretty too, although I will say she's kind of making a very Bella-esque face. Kristen Stewart as Bella. With like the underbite and closed eyes. I don't know. It reminds me of Kristen Stewart's Bella. But I do like the cover. It's purple, which I like. I like purple. It's a pretty color. I like tulips. I think tulips are very pretty. One of my favorite flowers, if not my favorite. So yeah, the cover was good. I like it. I like the aura reading. I wish we could have seen more of that because I thought it was super interesting. And also her being able to read a book by touch. I love that. Like, that's pretty cool. I would have loved to have had that power, especially in school with like textbooks and stuff. They were so boring. I like how flowers and their meanings are incorporated into this book. It's not talked about a whole lot, like the meanings and everything. That wasn't found out towards the end. But flowers were like persistent in the story, which could have been really cool. As someone whose Instagram was almost exclusively flowers a few years ago, I really appreciated this aspect of the book. Riley being able to visit Ever was also a cool idea. I didn't really care too much for Riley as a character, but I do like the fact that she can visit her sister even though she's dead. That was interesting. One thing that I think would have made this book better would be to work on the beginning and the end of the story. So, the beginning of this book, I felt like was very, very poorly done. Like I said in the beginning of this review, even though that's probably been an hour ago now, she kind of just reveals that she has psychic powers by saying she has psychic powers. What was it? I don't know this because I've been spying or peeking or whatever. I know this because I'm psychic. Like, that was very, very poorly done. So I felt like it would have been really interesting had it started at the crash. Had it started, maybe even as a flashback of the crash. That could have been really interesting, especially because Damon is part of that. But it would have made the beginning seem more engaging. Instead of just telling us stuff, show us, you know, like that's the main rule of storytelling. Show, don't tell, you know? So it would have been really interesting to have seen the book begin with the crash, or maybe with something else besides what we got, okay? And then the ending of the book, I felt like it was really drawn out. Really, really, really drawn out. We didn't have to have 2 fight scenes with Drina. It could have ended at the first one and kind of incorporated the aspects of the second fight into the first fight. So, you know, punching her in the chest, all these sorts of things. However, it may not have been They might not could have introduced Summerland. Maybe that's what she was going for. She wanted to introduce Summerland and, you know, have her say goodbye to Riley. Stuff like that. And maybe that could have been done before the big Drina fight, and then have one main big Drina fight, and then have it end, you know, like it did, with them all lovey-dovey or whatever. I felt like that would have worked out a lot better had it ended like that. So that was my constructive criticism, how things could have been changed for the better. In conclusion, I felt like I got a really good eye workout from how many times I rolled them. There were some good aspects of this book, but for the most part it was kind of just, it's a Twilight ripoff. I feel like the only good place to read this book is when you're bored on the toilet because you forgot to bring your phone with you. In fact, I may keep this book, and when I have my own house, I'll just leave it in my bathroom. My guests are in for a real treat.